There's a specific kind of fear that arrives quietly, usually late at night. It's not the fear of being alone. It's the fear of becoming invisible. The fear that if you keep choosing silence over noise, solitude over socializing, home over gatherings, one day you'll look up and realize you've quietly stepped out of everyone's life. And no one noticed. Some people carry this fear like a low hum beneath everything they do. They pull back from friendships that drain them. They stop answering group chats. They decline invitations with increasing frequency. And then, in the stillness they fought so hard to protect, a new question appears. What if I disappear completely? This isn't paranoia. This isn't irrational anxiety. This is the lived experience of adults who've spent years, sometimes decades, trying to balance their need for quiet with the world's demand for constant presence. And the older you get, the sharper this fear becomes. Because unlike loneliness, which announces itself loudly, the fear of invisibility creeps in slowly. It doesn't scream, it whispers. What if they stop inviting you altogether? What if you become the person no one thinks of anymore? What if choosing peace means choosing irrelevance? Here's what almost no one tells you. This fear isn't about other people forgetting you. It's about you forgetting that your existence has always been valid, even when it's quiet, even when it's unseen. Let's be clear about what we're actually talking about. This isn't about people who ghost everyone out of cruelty or avoidance. This is about people who carefully, thoughtfully, sometimes painfully choose to step back from social systems that exhaust them. People who stop performing availability, who stop saying yes out of obligation, who stop pretending that constant connection feels natural to them. And for a while, it feels like relief. You reclaim your evenings, your weekends, your mental space. You stop bracing yourself for small talk. You stop managing other people's expectations of who you should be. But then something shifts. You notice the invitations slow down. The messages become less frequent. The assumptions about your availability change. And instead of feeling free, you feel something else. Am I being erased? This is where the fear lives. Not in the solitude itself, but in the story you tell yourself about what it means. The story that says, if I'm not visible, I'm not valuable. The story that says, if I'm not participating, I'm not part of anything. The story that says, quiet people get left behind, and underneath all of that is an even deeper fear. What if I've made a terrible mistake? What if all those years of protecting your energy, of choosing yourself, of saying no to things that drained you? What if that was just you, slowly, methodically cutting yourself off from life itself? But here's the part most people completely misunderstand about you. You're not afraid of being alone. You've made peace with that. You're afraid that your way of being, your need for depth over breadth, silence over noise, solitude over performance, will cost you something irreplaceable. Connection, belonging, mattering. And that fear? It's not irrational. It's deeply, painfully human. Because you've seen what happens to people who live quietly. You've watched them fade from group photos, from holiday gatherings, from the collective memory of people they once knew. And you've wondered, is that my future? The Stoics, particularly Seneca, understood this tension intimately. Seneca wrote extensively about the life of withdrawal, not as escape, but as reclamation. He believed that most people waste their lives in the service of other people's expectations, performing a version of themselves that has nothing to do with who they actually are. But he also knew the cost. Seneca would say that the fear of invisibility is rooted in a fundamental confusion. The belief that your worth is determined by how often you appear in other people's lives. That your significance is measured by invitations received, messages answered, social proof accumulated. He would tell you that this is a trap, a quiet, insidious trap. Because the more you orient your life around being seen, the less you actually live. You become a performer in someone else's story, a supporting character in a narrative you didn't choose. And the irony is this: The people who remember you most deeply are rarely the ones who saw you most often. Seneca believed that true presence, the kind that actually matters, isn't about visibility. It's about depth, integrity, the quality of your attention when you are there. And that kind of presence doesn't require constant performance. It requires the opposite, the courage to step back, to protect your inner life, to refuse the exhausting theater of perpetual availability. He spent years in exile, removed from the center of Roman political life, stripped of the visibility and influence he'd once had. And in that forced withdrawal, he discovered something most people never learn, that relevance isn't about how many people know your name. It's about how deeply you know yourself. But knowing this intellectually doesn't make the fear go away. Because the fear isn't just philosophical, it's emotional, it's visceral. It's the fear that you'll wake up one day and realize you've become a stranger to everyone you once knew, that the price of protecting yourself was losing everyone who ever mattered. I remember a period in my own life when I felt this acutely. I had spent years trying to keep up, saying yes to things I didn't want to do, showing up to gatherings that left me hollow, maintaining friendships that felt more like obligations than connections. And then, slowly, I stopped. Not dramatically, not with announcements or explanations. I just stopped forcing it. At first, it felt like freedom. I had my time back, my energy, my clarity. But then the invitations slowed. The group chats went quiet. The assumptions shifted. And I started to wonder, did I make a mistake? There was a specific moment I remember, a birthday party I wasn't invited to. Not out of malice, just out of assumption. She never comes to these things anyway. And the strange part was, they were right. I didn't want to go. But not being invited felt different than choosing not to go. It felt like proof that I was fading, that my absence had become expected, that I was slowly, quietly becoming irrelevant. And for a while, I believed that story. I started questioning everything. Had I been too selective, too protective? Had I pushed people away without realizing it? Had I confused boundaries with walls? Had I mistaken solitude for safety when what I was really doing was hiding? These questions haunted me because they touched something real. The fear wasn't just about other people forgetting me. It was about me forgetting how to connect at all, about becoming so comfortable in my own company that I lost the ability to let anyone else in. But here's what I didn't understand then, and what took me years to see clearly. Invisibility isn't what happens when you step back from the noise. Invisibility is what happens when you disappear into the noise, when you become so busy performing presence that you lose any sense of who you actually are. The people I feared losing, most of them never really knew me. They knew the version of me that showed up, smiled, participated, the version that cost me everything to maintain. And when I stopped performing that version, I didn't lose connection. I lost the illusion of connection. The real connections, the ones that actually mattered, they didn't disappear. They adjusted, they deepened, they became more honest, because the people who could meet me in the quiet, those were my people. And the ones who couldn't, they were never mine to lose. Here's what actually happens when you quietly step out of everyone's life. Some people forget you. That's true. But the ones who matter, the ones whose presence actually nourishes you, they don't forget. They adjust, because real connection doesn't require constant visibility. It requires honesty, depth, the willingness to show up when it matters, not just when it's expected. And the people who can meet you there, those are your people. The rest, they were never yours to lose. This is the reframe that changes everything. You're not becoming invisible. You're becoming selective. You're not fading from people's lives. You're clarifying whose life you actually want to be part of. You're not losing relevance. You're refusing to measure your worth by someone else's metric. Seneca would call this voluntary withdrawal, not as rejection of the world, but as protection of what's essential. The Stoics believed that most of what we call social life is performance, noise, distraction, and that the people who step back from it aren't weak or broken. They're the ones who figured out that depth requires space, that clarity requires silence, that real presence requires the courage to be absent from things that don't serve you. But here's the part that still trips people up. Even when you understand this intellectually, the fear doesn't fully disappear. Because the fear isn't just about other people, it's about you. It's the fear that if you're not constantly visible, you'll forget how to connect at all, that you'll become so comfortable in solitude that you'll lose the ability to be vulnerable, to reach out, to let people in, that you'll wake up one day and realize you've built a life so quiet, so protected, that there's no room left for anyone else. And that fear, that's worth listening to. Not because it's necessarily true, but because it's pointing to something important. Because here's the distinction that matters most. There's a difference between choosing solitude and hiding in isolation. There's a difference between protecting your energy and refusing all vulnerability. There's a difference between stepping back from noise and stepping out of life entirely. Choosing solitude means you're intentional about where you place your energy. You say no to what drains you. You say yes to what nourishes you. You build a life that respects your need for quiet without cutting yourself off from depth. Hiding in isolation means you've stopped choosing. You've stopped reaching out. You've stopped believing that connection is possible for someone like you. One is an act of self-respect. The other is an act of self-protection that's gone too far. And the line between them, it's thinner than most people realize. So how do you know which side you're on? Ask yourself this: when was the last time I reached out to someone? Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Not to maintain appearances, not out of obligation, but because something in you wanted to share a thought, a feeling, a moment of your inner world with another human being. If the answer is, I can't remember, you're not choosing solitude, you're hiding. And that's okay. It's not a moral failure. It's not proof that you're broken. It's just information. Information that tells you, I've been protecting myself so carefully that I've forgotten how to let anyone in. The question isn't whether you should force yourself back into the noise. The question is, what would it look like to stay in the quiet, but open one small door? Here's what helps. First, you stop measuring your worth by how often you appear in other people's lives. You stop using visibility as proof of value. You stop believing that the number of invitations you receive determines whether you matter. Instead, you start measuring connection by depth, by the quality of the conversations you have, not the quantity. By the people who know you, actually know you, not the people who know of you. By the moments when you feel seen, not the moments when you're simply noticed. This shift alone changes everything. Because when you stop chasing visibility, you stop performing. And when you stop performing, you finally have the energy to show up as yourself. Second, you practice small acts of reaching out. Not grand gestures, not forced socializing, just small, honest moments of connection. A message to someone you've been thinking about, a voice note instead of a text, a question that invites real conversation, not small talk, a moment of vulnerability that says, I'm still here, I still care, I'm just doing it differently now. These don't have to be frequent, they don't have to be loud, they just have to be real. Because the people who matter don't need constant updates, they need honesty. They need to know that when you do show up, it's because you want to, not because you're obligated to. Third, you build a life that includes some visibility, on your terms. Maybe that's one close friend you see regularly. Maybe it's a small community, online or offline, where you can show up as yourself. Maybe it's a creative practice that lets you share your inner world without performing constant availability. The goal isn't to become visible to everyone. It's to be visible to someone, to a few people who matter, to yourself. Because here's the truth that no one tells you when you're afraid of disappearing. You don't become invisible by stepping back from the noise. You become invisible by never letting anyone see who you really are. And the most painful invisibility isn't being forgotten by others. It's forgetting yourself in the process of trying to be seen. And if you've spent years protecting yourself, if you've built walls so high that even you can't see over them anymore, that's not a failure. That's survival. But survival isn't the same as living. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, what would it look like to let one person in? Not everyone, not the whole world, just one. Maybe it's someone from your past who knew you before you learned to hide. Maybe it's someone new who doesn't need you to perform. Maybe it's a therapist, a group, a stranger on the internet who writes words that feel like they were pulled from your own mind. Whoever it is, the act of being seen, truly seen, by even one person changes everything. Because it reminds you that you're not invisible. You're just selective. And that's not the same thing. It reminds you that connection is still possible, that depth is still available, that you haven't lost the ability to let people in. You've just become more careful about who gets access. And that's not weakness, that's wisdom. Seneca spent much of his life in exile, removed from the center of Roman society, stripped of visibility, influence, the constant performance of political life. And in that exile, he wrote some of the most enduring reflections on what it means to live well. He didn't become irrelevant by stepping back. He became essential, not because he was seen by everyone, but because he saw himself clearly. And in that clarity, he created work that still speaks to people 2,000 years later. You don't need to be a philosopher. You don't need to write anything. You don't need to leave a legacy. But you do need to remember this. Your worth isn't determined by how often you show up in other people's lives. It's determined by how honestly you show up in your own. And the people who matter, they'll meet you there, not in the noise, not in the performance, in the quiet, in the depth, in the moments when you stop hiding and let yourself be seen. So if you've been afraid of becoming invisible, if you've been carrying the fear that stepping back means fading away, here's what I want you to know. You're not disappearing. You're clarifying. You're learning the difference between presence and performance, between connection and obligation, between being seen and being known. And that process, it's not easy. It's not fast. It doesn't come with applause or validation or proof that you're doing it right. But it's real, and real is what you've been searching for all along. The fear of invisibility is just the fear that your way of being won't be enough. That quiet won't be valued. That depth won't be recognized. That choosing solitude means choosing irrelevance. But here's the truth. The people who live the deepest lives are rarely the most visible. They're the ones who've learned to protect their inner world fiercely enough that when they do show up, it means something. And that kind of presence, it doesn't fade, it deepens. You're not becoming invisible, you're becoming yourself. And if that means fewer people see you, but the right people know you, that's not loss, that's clarity. And the people who can meet you in that clarity, they're not looking for constant visibility, they're looking for truth. And you have that. You've always had that. You just forgot for a while that it was enough. And if you've ever wondered whether it's possible to build a life that honors both your need for solitude and your need for connection without sacrificing one for the other, that's a different kind of story, one that unfolds in the next quiet conversation. Alone Together. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.